On a chilly evening, under the glow of flickering streetlights, a frail old beggar sat hunched on a bench near a bustling diner. His clothes were tattered, his hands calloused, and his face carried the lines of a hard-lived life. To most passers-by, he was invisible, just another forgotten soul in the chaos of the city. But tonight, fate had something extraordinary in store. Inside the diner, a well-dressed man ordered a hearty meal and sat near the window. He appeared to have it all: confidence, success, and wealth. But as he dug into his plate, something caught his eye. The old man outside, shivering in the cold. Curiosity tugged at him, and he stepped out, offering the man a warm smile and a seat at his table. What happened next stunned everyone. As the man tried to pay for the beggar's meal, the beggar pulled out a few crumpled bills, his last money, and insisted on paying instead. "It's the least I can do," the old man whispered, his voice trembling but resolute. Little did he know, the man he was helping wasn't just any stranger. He had a hidden identity that would change the beggar's life forever. What secrets did this stranger hold? Stay tuned to find out how this chance encounter unraveled into something unforgettable. The beggar's hands trembled as he handed over the money to the cashier, his expression a mix of pride and quiet dignity. The stranger, surprised but intrigued, didn't protest further. He simply sat back and watched the old man savor the meal, every bite seeming to warm him from the inside out. It was clear this wasn't just about food. For the beggar, this was about holding on to a sense of purpose, of still being able to give despite having so little. The man asked gently, "What made you decide to pay?" The beggar smiled faintly, his eyes distant as though recalling a memory. "Kindness, it's something the world forgets too often. A warm meal can change a bad day into a better one. I've been on the other side of that kindness before, and I know how much it matters." The stranger listened closely, taking in every word. His curiosity about this man grew with each passing moment. Who was he before life led him here? The wrinkles on his face, the tired look in his eyes, all hinted at a life of struggles, but also stories untold. Yet it wasn't just the beggar who carried secrets. The diner's atmosphere buzzed around them, but it felt as if time had slowed. The man leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Maybe it's fate that we met tonight." The beggar paused mid-bite, his fork hovering in the air. He studied the man's face carefully, as though trying to place a memory. "Fate, huh?" he said with a faint chuckle. "I stopped believing in fate a long time ago. Life has a way of wearing those ideas out of you." He didn't say it bitterly. It was more like a quiet resignation. The stranger nodded but didn't push further, sensing there was more to the old man's story than he was willing to share just yet. As the conversation unfolded, fragments of the beggar's past began to slip through. He spoke of better days, of a time when he had a family, a steady job, and dreams like anyone else. But one by one, those things faded away, each loss hitting harder than the last. "It's funny how life can turn in a moment," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the half-empty plate. "One mistake, one stroke of bad luck, and you're left fighting to survive." The stranger listened intently, but there was something in his expression, something that hinted at recognition or perhaps guilt. He didn't share much about himself, steering the conversation back to the beggar with well-placed questions. But the air between them was thick with unspoken truths. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the diner's windows. Inside, the two men sat in the glow of flickering neon, bound by an invisible thread neither could yet understand. The beggar finally asked, "So, why does a man like you care about someone like me?" The stranger's answer came with a faint, mysterious smile. "Because you cared first, and you're about to find out why that matters." The old beggar leaned back, his weary eyes narrowing as he studied the man sitting across from him. There was something about the stranger's calm demeanor, the way he seemed so sure of himself, that felt familiar. "You keep saying things that don't make sense," the beggar said cautiously. "Why would my small kindness mean so much to someone like you?" The stranger hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes the smallest gestures have the greatest impact," he replied, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, regret perhaps. "And sometimes those who seem to have the least end up teaching the most." The old man shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Words like that are easy when you're on the winning side of life." His voice grew quieter, tinged with pain. "I spent years being invisible, forgotten. So forgive me if I don't see what's so special about tonight." The stranger's expression darkened, the easy smile slipping for the first time. He leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "You're not invisible, not forgotten, and you're not as alone as you think." The beggar stiffened, his hand tightening around his fork. "What are you trying to say? Who are you, really?" The diner felt suddenly still, the bustling noise fading into the background as tension filled the air. The stranger reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, worn photograph. He slid it across the table, his gaze never leaving the old man's face. "Do you recognize this?" he asked softly. The beggar stared at the photo, his hand trembling as he picked it up. His face paled, his eyes widening in shock. How do you have this?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The stranger's reply was calm but heavy with meaning. "Because I've been looking for you for a long time." The beggar's fingers tightened around the photograph as his chest heaved with uneven breaths. The image was faded, but the faces were unmistakable. His younger self, standing beside a smiling woman and a boy no older than 6. He hadn't seen this picture in decades, and yet here it was, placed before him by a man he didn't even know. Or did he? His voice quivered. Who are you?" The stranger leaned back, his expression unreadable now, as if weighing whether to say more. "I think you already know," he said finally. "Or at least you'll soon enough." The old man shook his head, overwhelmed. Memories he had long buried began flooding back, bringing with them a wave of emotions: love, loss, guilt. His eyes darted to the stranger, searching for answers. "How did you find this? Why do you care?" The stranger exhaled slowly, as though the weight of what he was about to say had been crushing him for years. "Because the boy in that photo, he grew up," he said, his voice tight. "And he never stopped wondering why his father disappeared." The beggar froze, his mind racing. Before he could respond, the door of the diner swung open, and a sharp gust of wind blew through. A woman in a sleek coat stepped inside, her heels clicking on the floor. Her eyes locked onto the stranger, then shifted to the beggar. "I told you we didn't have much time," she said curtly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She turned to the beggar with a look of quiet determination. "There's more at stake here than you realize," she added. "You need to come with us. Now." The beggar's heart pounded in his chest. "What's going on?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. But neither the stranger nor the woman answered. The weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the air, and the walls of the diner suddenly felt far too close. The beggar's life had already taken an unexpected turn, but now it seemed he was standing on the edge of something far bigger and far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. The beggar's breath hitched as the woman's piercing gaze bore into him. His mind raced with questions, but the stranger stood and placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You need to trust us," he said quietly. "This isn't just about your past. It's about your future, too." Reluctantly, the beggar rose from his seat, clutching the photograph as if it were a lifeline. Outside, the night was colder than before, the wind biting against his weathered skin. The woman led them to a sleek black car parked under a flickering street lamp. Everything about this felt surreal, like he'd stepped into a story that wasn't his. As the car sped through the city streets, the stranger finally spoke. "You didn't abandon us," he said, his voice trembling. "They told us you did, but that wasn't the truth, was it?" The beggar's throat tightened. "I never wanted to leave," he whispered, "but I was in trouble. I thought disappearing was the only way to protect you and your mother." The car came to a halt outside a modest suburban home. The woman turned to the beggar. "There's someone inside waiting for you," she said. The old man hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest as he shuffled toward the door. When it opened, he froze. Standing there was a young man holding a small child. "Grandpa," the boy said, his voice filled with curiosity. Tears streamed down the beggar's face as he realized the stranger wasn't just his son. It was his family giving him a second chance. But as he stepped forward, the woman placed a hand on his arm. "There's something else you need to know," she said. "The trouble you ran from all those years ago. It's back, and it's bigger than you could have imagined." The beggar's joy collided with a fresh wave of fear, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future crashing over him. But for the first time in years, he wasn't facing it alone. The beggar stood frozen on the doorstep, overwhelmed by the faces staring back at him. His son, the boy he had left behind, now a grown man with a family of his own. The little boy peeked out from behind his father's leg, curious but shy. The old man's knees felt weak, and he whispered, "I never thought I'd see this day." His son stepped forward, his expression a mix of hesitation and hope. "Neither did I," he said softly. "But you're here now, and that's what matters." Without another word, he pulled his father into a hug, years of pain and questions melting into a single moment of reconciliation. The child giggled and joined them, wrapping his small arms around the old man's leg. For the first time in years, the beggar felt warmth, not just from their embrace, but from a sense of belonging he thought he'd lost forever. The woman, standing quietly by the car, gave a small nod to the stranger. "We've done our part," she said. The stranger glanced back at his father and smiled. "It's time he does his." Turning to the old man, he said, "We'll deal with the rest together. Family sticks together." The beggar's heart swelled. He wasn't alone anymore, and though challenges still loomed, he had something stronger than fear to guide him: love and the chance to make things right. As the door closed behind them, the night grew quieter, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was finally home.